16 months of the war in Ukraine and innocent civilians continue to get caught in the crossfire. The latest setback comes to the people of Kherson, who have had to pack their bags and evacuate after the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka dam. Kiev has predicted that at least 42,000 are at risk due to flooding. Water levels continue to rise after the Russian-occupied dam and hydroelectric power plant was destroyed yesterday. It is not yet clear whether the dam was deliberately attacked or whether the breach was the result of structural failure, but the blame game continues from both sides. Ukrainian President Zelensky called the destruction of the Kakhovka dam an act of mass environmental destruction by Russia, going on to say that this development will not stop Ukraine's military plans.
Why was the Nova Kakhovka dam breached? The destruction of a major dam in southern Ukraine has unleashed floodwaters across the war zone, forcing thousands of people from their homes, threatening vast swathes of agricultural land, and raising fears about the safety of Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Both Ukraine and Russia have accused the other of destroying the dam. Let's take a closer look at what we know so far. The Soviet-era dam is located on the Dnipro River in the Kherson region and is part of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. The reservoir holds 4.3 cubic miles of water, a volume roughly equal to the Great Salt Lake in the US state of Utah. It supplies water to the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia annexed in 2014, and to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, also under Russian control. Ukraine, which commented first, said Russia deliberately blew up the dam.
The whole world will know about this Russian war crime, the crime of ecocide.
President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russian forces of blowing up the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station from inside the facility. A Ukrainian military spokesperson said Russia's aim was to prevent Ukrainian troops crossing the Dnipro River to attack Russian occupying forces. Russia has hit back, saying Ukraine sabotaged the dam to cut off water supplies to Crimea and to distract attention from its faltering counter-offensive. Here's Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu.
Aiming to prevent the offensive operations by the Russian army on this section of the front line, the Kyiv regime committed an act of sabotage, or rather, terrorist act.
With water levels surging higher, many thousands of people are likely to be affected. Evacuations of civilians began on both sides of the front line. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the dam's destruction was another example of the human cost of war.
At least 16,000 people have already fled their homes, lost their homes, with safe and clean drinking water supplies at risk for many thousands more. We are seeing the effects in the city of Kherson, the town of Nova Kakhovka, and 80 other towns and villages along the Dnipro River. Massive flooding, large-scale evacuations, environmental devastation, destruction of newly planted crops. And that is threats to the highly threatened Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest nuclear facility.
Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry has claimed that Ukraine has mounted unsuccessful attacks near Bakhmut.
Вооруженные силы Украины, не добившись цели наступления и понеся существенные потери на южнодонецком направлении, предпринимали попытки прорвать оборону наших войск на Донецком направлении в районе города Артемовск. В течение прошедших суток активными действиями южной группировки войск успешно отражены 8 попыток наступления штурмовых отрядов 56-й мотопехотной, 57-й механизированной бригад Вооруженных сил Украины в направлении населенных пунктов Ягодная, Дубово-Васильевка, западная окраина Артемовска, Андреевка, Орехово-Васильевка, а также 24-й механизированный и 3-й штурмовой бригад в районе населенного пункта Клещеевка. Цели наступления противник не добился. Вклинение в нашу оборону не допущено.
I can only assess what I see here on the video. I see a really big dam breach here with a catastrophic discharge flowing downstream. I see a big breach in the concrete part of the dam in the weir. That's the big breach here, and a second smaller breach here in the power plant. And I think that discharge is so large that there is no possibility for a reparation here during the big flood now. I think maybe the breaches are increasing during the flood, but from the view here, I would assess that there is maybe no increasing, but it's possible that the breaches are enlarging furthermore. There's the big breach in the weir with a weir base, with the weir gates, and here is a second smaller breach in the area of the power plant, the area of the turbines, I think. But the bigger one is here in the weir.
Der Energieerzeugung über Wasserkraft erfolgen, plus Kernkraft, aber da hat die Wasserkraft schon eine große Bedeutung.
I think for the use of the reservoir, there's a problem. I think it's used for cooling of the nuclear power plant. It's used for irrigation. It's used for drinking water. But there's a catastrophic situation for the downstream area. I think large areas are flooded. I hope in a slow velocity, because the area is very flat, and maybe there is enough time to save the people living there.
Abfluss verbleiben darf, und da kann es natürlich stärkere oder höhere Auflagen geben in Zukunft.
Yes, first I think about the people in the downstream area who have to be saved. I hope they can save them, and the flooding is not so fast. And then I think about the rebuilding of the structure. I think it's a really hard work, and maybe it's maybe possible only when the war is ended, and that is a really big challenge to do this.
Obwohl eigentlich die installierte Leistung vielleicht sogar ein bisschen weniger ist. Da kommt halt dann mehr Jahresarbeit raus dann dabei.
Und da gibt es jetzt dann durchaus Diskussionen, in welcher Form die Anlage weiterlaufen darf. Also da kann man natürlich auch noch höhere ökologische Auflagen machen. It's very important for the energy production. I think their installed capacity is more than some hundreds of megawatt, but also very important for the drinking water, for irrigation, and also for the cooling of the nuclear power plant. It's a very important structure.
Klar war, dass man den Strom in Zukunft brauchen wird. Also da gab es halt dann den Oskar von Willer, der ist auch Namensgeber für unser Institut, der
The United Nations has no access to independent information on the circumstances that led to the destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant dam. But one thing is clear. This is another devastating consequence of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We'll continue our humanitarian work and our appeals for urgent, safe and secure humanitarian access. Today's tragedy is yet another example of the horrific price of war on people. The floodgates of suffering have been overflowing for more than a year, and that must stop. Attacks against civilians and critical civilian infrastructure must stop. And we must act to ensure accountability and respect for international humanitarian law. Above all, I appeal for a just peace in line with the UN Charter, international law, and the resolutions of the General Assembly. And I thank you.
We hope to have more information in the coming days, but I mean, come on, let's be obvious. I mean, why would Ukraine do this to its own territory and people? Flood its land, force tens of thousands to leave their homes. It just doesn't make sense.
We've been prioritizing air defense now for many, many months, and in this last package, one I think we just talked about last week, there were additional interceptor missiles. So without getting ahead of announcements to come, I can assure you that air defense remains top on the list of the kinds of capabilities that we're going to continue to make sure Ukraine has. Again, I don't want to get ahead of where we are. We know air defense is a priority, and we know how well the Patriots have been performing inside Ukraine, which is, again, why we provided some additional interceptor missiles last week. All I can tell you is that we're going to prioritize it going forward. I just don't want to get ahead of announcements.
I also want to speak to the destruction of the dam in southern Ukraine, which is absolutely devastating for lives and livelihoods across the region. This is yet another example of the horrific consequences of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine.